So are you from Macon?
I am not originally from Macon. I came to Macon in 1982 after I got out of the service. When my buddy Terry and I got to Macon, we put a band together with some guys, a couple of guys, a bass player and a drummer, and we called the band Free Exit. And we did a lot of rock and roll cover tunes, some rhythm and blues stuff, Allman Brothers type. A little bit of stretching out as far as even some Bruce Springsteen over some time. Then we started getting into REO Speedwagon and even some Steely Dan. We incorporated some original music. Terry and I actually wrote while we were out in Oklahoma in the service together. And when we came here, these guys had a real passion for playing, and that's when the first time I actually felt what playing was, instead of duplicating what was on a record, actually feeling the grooves and playing the parts with passion. And we had a good handful of originals, and the band was kicking. We actually had a pretty good following. It was a hot live band, and we just didn't know what to do with that. And for about 2 years, we stayed cooking, and not knowing what to do, we just sort of spun ourselves and burned ourselves out. Our drummer, Keith, got a call and took off and went and played with some guys, and he called me up, I don't know, a couple of weeks into him playing with them, and all excited. Said they wanted a guitar player that could sing, and wanted me to come out there. He said, I told them all about you. It's this guy, the bass player is Joe Dan Petty, played with Grinder Switch, and the piano player was Bob Spearman, who played with Stillwater. So my first thought was, I'm definitely not good enough to go out there and play with those guys, you know, and Keith said, you just need to come out there. The bass player, Joe Dan Petty, started asking me some really interesting questions that made me think about how I was answering it, and very quickly I realized that this guy was wise beyond his years, and what a musical teacher he could be. I mean, he made me think, he challenged me, and I knew right then I needed to stay and play with these guys, which we ended up doing. The band concept, once we knew we had a core band, Joe Dan's, I guess his concept was to have a 50s and 60s rock and roll band, American rock and roll band, not a beach band. So we started laying down these tunes, going back and getting the original recordings and trying to capture the passion these guys cut with back then, and it started working. And our band started cooking, and we needed to come up with a name, and we didn't know what to call the band, and we knew the music was kind of making people up, you know, it brought you up, made you feel good. And a fella that Bob Spearman was working for owned a rock and roll merchandising company. Bob was describing all this to him, and like nothing, he turns around and says, why don't you call it the Lifters? So that's exactly what we called it. Joe Dan, of course, was an original roadie with the Allman Brothers band, and he was still tied to the band because they were dear friends, a childhood friend with Dickie Betts. And it gave me an awesome opportunity to go spend time around Dickie when he was cutting some of his solo stuff. We'd go down, and all of a sudden I'm walking in the studio, and there's Dickie Betts cutting guitar tracks. Moving forward, the Allman Brothers reunited. I got to actually witness that when they had their auditions for who the bass players were going to be. I'm over here, this kid from New Jersey that came to Macon in 1982, and I'm very aware of how lucky and how blessed I am. How many good old Georgia boys would kill to be in the shoes I was in. I kept my mouth closed a lot and my ears open a lot, and tried to retain what these guys were laying down. I get a phone call, hey Phil, you want to go on the road and cover the drums for the brothers on this leg of this tour? So I'm just like, holy cow, of course I do, you know. So next thing I know, I'm driving up to Atlanta, getting on a tour bus. Did that leg of the tour. Well, the last night of the last show of that leg was in Madison Square Garden. And I'm a Jersey boy originally, so I've been in Madison Square Garden, seen several shows. The stage was set, the gear was tested, and it was just kind of downtime. And I decided I was going to go out there, and I picked up Dickie Betts's gold top Les Paul, which I was allowed to. I was the roadie, you know. And I cranked up his Marshall amplifier and stood my toes off the edge of the stage in Madison Square Garden and played my butt off as best I could. So now when people say, so where have you played? I tell them, yeah, man, I played the Garden, you know. It was for about a couple of hundred security people, but that was it, you know.
So what happened after the Lifters?
I needed to sort of get this steady income thing shaken, and so I took a house gig at Nashville South in Macon. We had a teenage kid who would come in and play with us on the weekends named Jason Williams. A buddy of mine comes up to me and he goes, hey man, you know that cool song that's out, Hicktown, by Jason Aldean? And I was like, yeah. And he goes, that was Jason Williams that played with y'all. I remembered when he moved to Nashville, he changed his name to Aldean because he was talking about doing that even back then. So that was sort of a cool thing. We went from that gig from Nashville South over to Whiskey River in Macon. Clearly some of the best musicians I ever worked with in that bar, and the closest I probably ever came to death was in that bar. My wife and I really enjoyed it. We were playing some really challenging music. We began to party a little bit because it was such a concert atmosphere. Those curtains would open up every weekend and that bar would be full of screaming people loving what we were laying down. We wanted a little more energy than we had, and then after a little while the drinking wasn't enough, and we started doing these little speed pills, and the next thing you know, somebody said, try this crank, this will get you going. For about the next year and a half, we really flirted with death. My wife and I both were in horrendous condition, and we knew that had to end. We recorded a CD during those years there, and which was a sort of a gem in the middle of the chaos and confusion, and we got some really good country songs out of the deal. We knew that had to end, and it was going to end one way or the other. We were blessed enough to realize that we had to end it and make some changes, and we began that process, which was not easy to do.
So that was like 20 years of Macon.
That was 20 years.
So what have you been doing for the last 10 or so?
Our daughter goes out, plays, and meets this friend 2 houses down. She came home all excited and was just jumping all up and down, and then concluded her excitement by saying, and they invited me to church, her and her mom. Can I go? So I go to the church service at the movie theater. I hear the band start playing, and the first thing I hear is, that kind of sounds like rock and roll to me. So now I'm checking out of all the conversation going on in the lobby. Never heard and was not aware of what contemporary Christian music sounded like. I make a beeline down into the theater, and I look up on the stage, and I see 2 dear friends of mine, Pam Floyd and Glenn Floyd, in the band, and she's singing about Jesus up there. So we made the decision to start coming and worshiping at Harvest Church. Everything felt right, and we were a wreck, and we needed some help to straighten ourselves out. And it didn't take long before we were blessed with the opportunity to become part of the music ministry. And then we thought, like, holy cow, we get to play for God too?
For you, my Lord, I'm a warrior.